Hey everyone! Today we're going to go over some more advanced functions in both Gravit Designer and Illustrator using the pen tool and a few other functions that the programs have. So on the page first, to practice using the pen tool, remember we want to make sure that we're using as few of anchor points as possible as drawing your shapes. So let's take a look again at the shape that's right here. It's kind of an S form. And look at the amount of anchor points that you really should be dropping. When you get to a curved edge like this, if you drop one anchor point to start the curve, one in the center of the curve, again, look at how I'm pulling this so that I'm matching it up with the curve on that top edge, and then coming down to the bottom edge of that curve, again, I can pull it out as far as I need to match it up. I'm going to create a nice smooth curve that way rather than dropping a ton of anchor points going around the outside edge. As few as you possibly can, the better the shape is going to look at the end. So again, coming to this curve, I'm going to drop one in the center here and one on each end of that curve. Straight lines are obviously very easy. Just click on the outside point. You don't need to drop anything in the middle. I'm here at another curve, so I have one on the outside, one I'm going to pull in the center, and one to get out of that curve. I have a curve bubbling out, so again, I want one to start the curve, one in the center of the curve to actually construct that curve, and then one to end the curve on the other side. Same thing for this middle curve here. I'm going to create one to start the curve, one in the center, and then again one more at the top. Look at how I'm pulling these each time to make sure that the line is aligned exactly where I want it to be with the shape. And then finishing off by clicking on that final anchor point. And there I have a pretty close resemblance to what the shape was underneath. If you ever need to fix any of your anchor points, remember that you can always go to the sub-select tool to click on those points and move them around. Using your arrow keys on the keyboard is a nice little touch to that too. Gives you a little bit finer of a movement rather than dragging with your mouse. And of course you also have your handlebars here too if you need to change the curve at all to make sure that it aligns with your shape as perfect as you want it to be. And just a little tip here as well, if I was to select this shape and I want to change the color of it, we've been through fills and borders, which are right here in Gravit Designer. If I didn't want a stroke, you could turn that off by clicking the visibility icon. Well, what if you want a gradient instead of just a solid fill? So if I go to the color menu here, I can change color fill to linear gradient and adjust my colors by clicking on the bar at the top and choosing the color that I want it to be. Okay, so you can see how I made that red and blue just by moving this around. There's also radial gradients, which is coming from the center and moving out instead of linear, which is a line. Angular, so going from one side to the other. A texture fill is another thing that you can use. You can choose the image that you want to create that texture on your item. Noise, it's going to give it kind of that static grain look. And background fill is going to fill it with whatever color that you select. Okay, so just a few tips there as you're choosing what colors you want it to be, just so you know is a more advanced option. Okay. The next step here is to draw the shape, but being able to cut a shape in half or into as many slices as you want is important. So using the pen tool, I'm just going to quickly, since it's all straight lines, very easy, just clicking on each of the corners of this object, kind of looks like the letter K, until I get back to that starting point. Okay, once I create this shape, I'm going to go up to my knife tool. You can see it up here at the top of your screen. And with the knife tool, I can click on one anchor point and drag across to whatever anchor point I want to cut through. If you don't have the amount of anchor points that you need or no anchor points in that area, remember you can always go to your pen tool and drop anchor points on your path wherever you want to find that exact location to cut through. But now you can see that I actually have two shapes. So here's the back and front of my K that I can now separate. Maybe if I drew the shape, I wanted a second one that was going to be rotated and flipped on the other side. Remember Control C and Control V is edit copy and edit paste. So that's going to give me two of that same shape. And if I go to modify, transform, and then over to flip horizontal, you can see that I can really easily create two of that exact same shape to create a logo or design of whatever I'm using for my piece. All right, and the last one here is going to be creating one shape out of a bunch of smaller shapes. So I could use the pen tool and draw this whole piece, but since it's all made up of very geometric shapes, why not use our shape tool? So I'm going to use my rectangle tool first and go through and draw each of these rectangles or squares. Some of them are squares. Okay, and then my final shape is the ellipse or sphere. I'm going to hold shift and stretch that circle and put it right into place. Okay, so once I have all of my shapes created, you can see they're all still individual shapes here. I can hold down the shift key on my keyboard to select all of my shapes. If you had nothing else on your page and you had your bottom layer locked too, you could always drag over the top and select all of them at once. That's a little shortcut there. And then up at the top of your screen, you're going to see this option here that says Create Compound Shape. You can get to it there, or you can also go to Modify and down to Create Compound. Either way, it's going to do the same thing. And that's going to merge it all into one piece. You can see I can move it over. I can change the color of it all at once very easily. So that is another way to make smaller pieces and merge them all together instead of trying to draw all of this out with the pen tool, if your idea can be made using some simple shapes or forms. Taking this same idea, if I was to create something like, let's say, a pattern of boxes. Let's copy and paste that guy a couple times. So you can see here I just repeated that same box multiple times. I also created a few lines going down the page to show you this next little tip. So using my shape tool again, I can grab the ellipse or whatever shape I wanted to actually use as my cookie cutter shape to create what we call a clipping mask. I'm going to drag over the top of all of my shapes and that circle that I created. You can kind of see a preview through the circle of where I'm going to be actually cutting this path. And then if I go to Modify and down to Mask with Shape, it'll actually cut it into that shape that I can use on my design. Well, what if I want to be able to see through into the background? I don't want this filled with solid white. Well, no problem. Once you have your shape created, you can turn the fill off. And then I'm just left with that pattern that I had created underneath that I could apply to anything. So thinking about making the pattern of a shirt, or just to add a stylized effect, maybe a circle that is a bunch of lines that comes into your design, this is a really nice way to do that. Now coming back over to Illustrator, let's go through the same technique and look at the differences. So I'm going to start by grabbing my regular pen tool and going through that same process on this S shape. Again, remember whenever you get to curves, dropping 3 points is a good idea to do the start, the curve, and then the end. If you are getting a fill, remember you can always turn that off too so you can see what you're doing in Illustrator. But the fewer anchor points you drop, the nicer the shape is going to look when you're done. If you end up with too many anchor points, remember you can always go back and delete them with the Delete Anchor Point tool on either of the programs, because you really don't want extras when you don't need them. You're going to see little bumps that make a difference. If you drop a lot, it's really going to look unfinished and bumpy. So the fewer the better. When you get to a curve, 3 is a good number to be able to make those curves. So here's that same S. If I wanted to do the gradient effect that we just looked at, I'm going to make a fill color, and you can see that underneath the fill color, you're going to see the gradient or no fill option. I'm going to change it to a gradient right off the bat, and you should see that your gradient menu is going to automatically appear on the side of the screen when you change it to that. And on this gradient menu, I can change the colors again. If I go up to the top, you can open up the options if you're not seeing all of the options there right off the bat. Mine has already been open, but you can see I could hide those options. This is what might show up automatically on your screen, so you want to show your options there. You can see the different types of gradients. We have the radial, okay, and our linear, just like we had before. So you can double click on the sidebars here on the white or the black dot to be able to change those colors. Just make sure it's set to RGB color mode, and you are clicking on the painter palette to choose the colors that you want, or you can also use your eyedropper if there's another color in your scene somewhere that you wanted to grab to change that value to. For this next one, we're going to again draw the shape using our pen tool. Super simple because we're just dropping anchor points around the outside of the entire shape. And then I'm going to cut that shape in half again. Remember to turn off your fill in Illustrator if you have one set as you're drawing a shape like this so you can see what you're doing. Now, instead of the knife tool this time in Illustrator, it gives you the scissors option. I think this works a little bit easier. You don't have to just go straight across. You can click on the points that you want to cut. So I'm going to grab my scissors and zoom in a little bit here. So you can see that I'm going to click on this top anchor point here, and then also click on the bottom anchor point there. Already you can see that my path now is selected on the right hand side but not on the left. So if I was to click on one of these sides, I can pull that off. And same thing with the other side, I can pull that. And if you wanted to create that same effect that we saw of making a copy of it, Control C, Control V to make that copy. And then I can go to Object, Transform, and Reflect. And make sure it's set to vertical, 90 degrees is perfect, click OK. And I can create that reflection. You could also see in that menu that there was the horizontal flip as well, and a few more options to play around with as you're creating shapes. All right, and let's take a look at that last one that we did again. Using our shape tool, I'm gonna go through and draw each of these shapes. One nice thing about Illustrator is I don't have to click on the shape tool in between each one. I can draw them all right away. There's my shapes. Just need my ellipse again. Hold Shift as I stretch a perfect circle. And as long as you have that background layer locked, you can grab all of them at once and right click to either group them together if you were to move them around, or if you want them to merge together as one piece that I showed you on the other program, Gravit Designer. You can see in the Pathfinder there's that option where it shows you two squares coming together. It looks exactly the same as what it looked like in Gravit. If you click on that, it's going to move them all together as one piece. If you don't see your Pathfinder window open automatically, you can always go to Window and open up the Pathfinder separately, and that's going to give you all of those same options. Well, what if I wanted to create a pattern like I showed you in Gravit Designer? It's going to be very similar. So really quickly, let me just draw a few lines here. In Illustrator, there is a technique to draw lines quickly that I will show you. This is something that you can't do in Gravit Designer. One, I drew two lines already, so you can see them here on the page. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that they're aligned with each other. So on my Properties menu again, I'm just going to double check that I click on the vertical align option. It's going to bump them so that they're even. It's a nice little trick to use too if you're creating anything that you want to be sitting at the same plane on your space, whether it's vertical, horizontal, push to the left, push to the right, or whatnot. So once I have two lines or two shapes created, I can go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. change the specified steps, make sure that is selected, to the number of lines that I want to create. Click OK. And then Object Blend Make, and it's going to create that number of lines for me automatically. So to create that cookie cutter or clipping mask that we just did in Gravit Designer, I'm again going to grab a circle and put it on top of those lines. Select all of those things on the page. Okay, right click, and then I can go to Make Clipping Mask right here. And it'll cut it just like it did in the other program. It automatically does not clip with the background, so you don't have to worry about turning that off, and I can use this as a design piece or add a texture to anything on my page. After today, you should know a few more advanced tips to use as we're creating things in Adobe Illustrator or on Gravit Designer. One is to create gradients in the background, keeping in mind to keep minimal points as you're dropping them along your path. Two is to actually slice a shape in half if you need to, or to repeat it and flip it horizontally or vertically in that space. And then finally, you can create multiple shapes and actually combine them all together to be one shape that you can use throughout the design. You can also create patterns of any type to use on your design and use that cookie cutter method to clipping mask on top of it and actually use just that space that you created in any part of your design.